Chuck Fresh with Computer Care Clinic, and here's your tip of the day. We get this question probably 20 times a day. People say, well, what kind of computer should I buy? I'm in the market. I'm finally ready to upgrade this old Windows XP thing, and what should I get? Do I even need a computer? I see these people running around with these cell phones and these tablets and iPads and stuff. So do I really even need a computer? And the answer to that question is it's simple, but it can be difficult. It's really based on what you do with it, what you need that device for. Now, everyone needs to connect to the internet. It's a given, and it really depends what you need to do when you connect to that internet. I guess the question really comes down to, are you a consumer of information or are you a creator? And a consumer, meaning someone who just reads things, who reads emails and does web research before buying products or services. That is a consumer of data, meaning you're just downloading what other people have created for you. And that's what most people do. For the consumer of data, you really don't need as much processing power or as much of a serious device as someone who is creating things for the internet, creating graphic design or videos or audio production. I guess the number one question is, what kind of a processor should I get? And basically the most popular one still is the Intel platform, and they produce the Celeron and Pentium and the Core i3, i5, and i7. And they produce something called a Celeron, a Pentium, and the Core chips. Now, back in the day, it used to be really easy to differentiate between these processors that Intel or AMD put out because everything was built on clock speed. Well, that's no longer the case. You can't differentiate just based on clock speed because there's a couple of different things that happen now. For the basic user this is really targeted to, you're fine in most cases with a modern day Celeron, Pentium, or Core i3. I usually err on the side of future-proofing, so I tell people to go towards the i3. Gives you a little bit more flexibility in the future. You'll be able to run whatever you're going to throw at that things. Even if you just do decide to get into some limited gaming, you could still run a lot of that stuff with the i3. Not the heavy-duty games, the latest and greatest probably won't run real well with an i3, but for most average users who do email and solitaire and mahjong and that type of stuff, if you're just surfing the web and doing that stuff, then the i3 is going to be fine. When I'm talking about creator, I'm talking about somebody who's going to use Photoshop and who's going to use raw files, like professional photographers and people who do video editing with multiple tracks and use a lot of effects. If you're just using Windows Movie Maker or something along those lines, then you probably don't need the top end. You could do somewhere in the middle towards the lower end and you'll probably be fine. Of course, when you're rendering those effects, that's where the processor really kicks in and the i7's multiple cores really begin to shine. So in terms of memory, it's very, very inexpensive now. It's difficult to find a computer with less than 4 gigabytes of RAM. And for what we've seen, 4 gigabytes seems to be fine for a consumer and even a lot of people who do some mild creation using, if you're doing like brochures and things in Microsoft Publisher or Word, then the 4 gigs tends to be fine. But the rule of thumb is get as much as you can for as little as you can pay for it. So 8 gigs is really good. It's overkill. Honestly, it's overkill in a lot of situations. Do you really need 8 gigs? No, you don't. Do you need 16? Probably not. Most of the business class Dells that we sell to companies have about 4 gigs of RAM, and that's more than adequate. And that's really enough for people who are running. I've got people who are running all these stock programs on multiple monitors, and they seem to be fine with this particular machine. Once in a while, if they open up a Firefox and they have 20 tabs open, they might see a little degradation there, but and you can fix that by adding either a video card or a little bit more memory, and that will usually take care of that slowness. But for the average user, if you're just doing basic stuff, like most of our customers, shoot, Celeron Pentium i3 with 4 gigs of RAM should really get you through. You really don't have a choice in operating systems now in terms of the Windows platform for consumers. Everything's going to be shipped with Windows 10 now, with Windows 10 Home. And it's a fine operating system. It's Well, we've seen a couple of issues with it where the mouse and keyboard stop responding, and sometimes there's some driver updates. But you're going to run into those bugs with any new operating system, including the Mac platform, which I've seen plenty of problems with that. And the iOS thing's driving me absolutely batty right now. We got a couple of iPhones that won't connect to AT&T routers right now. It's just there's no fix for it. Nobody seems to know what's going on, but miraculously, they'll come out with a patch and fix that probably within a few weeks. So we'll just kind of have to sit on our hands here. But there's no operating system that's perfect right out of the box, considering all the software and all the programs and all the things you're going to ask it to do, all the almost limitless variations. It is amazing that they work as well as they do, that they're able to get everything done that you ask for. A good 99.9% of everything you're going to tell that computer to do, it's going to be able to do successfully. So that is a small miracle of technology. The next question we get is, do I even need a computer? I have most of our clients are a little bit older, and they come in here and say, well, I've got these kids running around with these little things in their hand. They said they don't even need a computer anymore. In a lot of cases, it's true. If you're not creating content for the internet, you may not need one. If you don't do any work and you're unemployed and you're just sitting around on your hands and you watch videos all day, then what the heck do you need a computer for? You really don't. But in reality, most of us have something we're going to need to do. Now, let me tell you what you need a computer for. There's 4 things that are downsides to a tablet that you still need a computer for. Number 1 is typing. Typing on the screen, or even with these little weird keyboards that you can come with the Surface or the iPad, and we'll talk about the difference in these two in a moment. But it's really difficult to type on these things, especially if you learned on a traditional typewriter or a keyboard, or you're used to a desktop computer. You're going to have a devil of a time getting used to these little tablet things. The keys are smaller, the space between them is smaller, and they don't have that similar raised tactile feel that you're going to be used to. So it's going to take a little while. With that said, a lot of people get by. They figure it out. It takes a month for them to get used to it, and they can type away on these things. Some people are amazingly fast on a keyboard on a cell phone. These kids with these little 2-finger typing, they're flying through these things, and they could type an entire paper on a phone. So it is possible, but it really depends on your aptitude and your learning abilities to jump into something brand new that you've never done before. And a lot of people become set in their ways. They don't want to learn something new. So that's problem number 1, is typing. But in terms of storage, if you want to store your entire photo album, you're not going to be able to do it on these things, because storage, solid state storage, is still very, very expensive. I think the most you can get on an iPad or a Surface Pro is about, I think they're 512 gigabytes. Where a desktop computer, it's not uncommon to see something sold with 3 or 4 terabytes. 4,000 gigabytes of storage. So if you want to back up everything to a digital archive, these tablets are not going to be able to store that much information. Typically out of the box, the lower cost ones, the entry levels, you're looking at 64 gigabytes or 128 gigabytes of storage, and it's just not a lot of storage. And again, if you're storing a lot of photos, videos, movies, music, it's going to fill up quicker than you think. So the business class computers, on the computer side, the laptops, even the laptops have 500 gigabytes to start, and you can upgrade from there. It's really all most people need in our business, the data consumers. But again, if you want to store a whole bunch of stuff, you're going to run into walls here, and it's going to become very, very expensive. There are cloud options like Apple's iCloud, there's Dropbox, there's Google Drive, all kinds of cloud options available. They are paid for the most part. They are subscription-based. After they give you a little bit of a, I think Apple gives you 5 gigs, Dropbox gives you 2, might be a little bit more now. So they give you a little bit to start with, but it's a paltry amount. But if you need any serious storage on the cloud, you're going to end up paying for it. And those are subscription-based. They're billed usually every month. You're going to run into issues if you want to print. Now, that's not saying you can't print from an iPad, because you absolutely can. There's that new ePrint thing that'll allow you to print certain things from iPads, but it's clunky to set up. You need a wireless connection for all of these things. And a lot of people come in here and say, hey, can you help me configure this printing thing up? And it's not easy. It's not rocket scientist. You don't need an engineering degree to do it, but it's just not as simple as it should be. On the other hand, and this is one of the advantages of the Surface Pro, because it actually runs Windows 10. It is a full Windows operating system in these Microsoft Surfaces over the iPad. So essentially, if you're running Windows 10 on a desktop, it's going to be the same exact look, feel, interface, and connectability, if that's even a word, that you're going to get on a Windows computer, on a full laptop or desktop computer. So that's the advantage of doing the Surface over the iPad. And let's lead us into point number 4. You're not going to be able to run your software on an iPad or some Android tablets. So that's the other issue there. If you have an old version of Quicken or QuickBooks or an old version of Office, you're going to have a hard time transferring that over, if it's even possible, to the iPad. Now, the iPad does have a very, very large app store, and there are workarounds. But again, you're going to have to learn something new. It's going to be not what you're used to. It'll be a different financial program or a different type of interface, something you may not be used to. Wherein if you go to the Surface or a traditional computer, you'll be able to run some of your old programs. Most of them will still work. So that's issue number 4 is software availability. Again, if you decide you want to go with a tablet, you're probably going to want to go to Surface if you're a person who has an established bunch of software. You can even run Photoshop in the Adobe Creative Cloud on these Surfaces because they're so powerful. You can run versions of them on the iPad, but they're just a little, in my opinion, are a little weird. It's not the same kind of interface. A lot of people assume that we'll talk about the PC versus Mac versus iOS. Now, what's neat about the Windows tablets is they are running a full version of Windows 10. When you go to the Mac operating system, this has always struck me as strange. There's a couple of things Apple's done that's really, really bizarre. Number one, they didn't invent the touchscreen interface. Microsoft had a tablet out years ago. But Apple kind of brought the touchscreen interface to the forefront. However, it's not available on any of their computers, which is just bizarre. It's just mind-boggling. And the second thing is, iOS, the operating system that runs Apple's phones and their iPads, is completely different and isolated from the system that runs their computers. It's the most bizarre thing. So it's no touchscreens in iOS. If you're using an iPad and you think you're going to go to a Mac operating system on a MacBook Pro, you're in for a heck of a learning curve because they're completely separate and have nothing to do with each other. Here's the other issue on the mobile side of things. If you go to a laptop, especially like something like a Surface, they have power-sipping chips. There has to be a balance between being completely wireless and running on a battery versus what you're going to use in processing power. Because the more processing power you have, the more electrical power it takes and the less your battery lasts. So most laptops will have a mobile version of the chip, which will have less cores. It'll run on less electricity to try to conserve battery power, unless you have it plugged in, and you can override that and run it in performance mode. So that's another thing to consider. So there's a lot of information here. To narrow it down, if you're an average user, if you're a consumer of data, you probably can use an iPad. Unless you want to print a lot. If you do a lot of printing, extensive printing and typing, you're probably going to be okay with an iPad. Otherwise, if you're going to do any sort of typing, if you're going to do spreadsheets, if you want to do a lot of printing and you want to do content creation, you're probably still going to need some sort of computer. If you're going to do a tablet, I would advise most of my customers to go to a Surface instead of an iPad Pro. Price-wise, they're in the same ballpark now. You're looking at about $1,000 to $1,200 for a mid-range iPad Pro or a Surface Pro 4. Hope I didn't confuse the heck out of you. There's trillions of websites out there that will give you information. Compare all these things against each other. I just wanted to give you a baseline overview for our customers who come in and ask us, well, what should I get? My name is Chuck Fresh. I'm with Computer Care Clinic. If you have any tips and tricks and any more information that you feel would be helpful for our people, or even things that you stumbled on yourself, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and thanks again for watching.